Hey, second graders, it's Miss Barnett. Today we're going to read the fairy tale Little Red Riding Hood. All right, let's get started. This is the story of Little Red Riding Hood. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who lived in a village near a big forest. Her grandma had made her a beautiful red cloak with a big red hood, which she wore every day, every time she went outside. And so everyone in the village called her Little Red Riding Hood. One day, Little Red Riding Hood's mother said, "Grandma isn't feeling very well. Will you take this basket of food through the forest to her cottage?" "Yes," said Little Red Riding Hood. "I sure would love to see Grandma." She put on her red cloak and she pulled up her red hood and she took the basket of food into the forest. "Remember," her mother called after her, "don't talk to any strangers." "I won't," Little Red Riding Hood promised, and she skipped down the path and into the woods. Little Red Riding Hood did not have to worry about getting lost in the forest because she knew the way to Grandma's house very well. But along the way, she saw some beautiful wildflowers growing near the path. "I bet Grandma would really like these," she said to herself, and she stopped to pick a few. "Hello there, little girl," said a deep growling voice from behind her. Little Red Riding Hood was very startled. She spun around and saw a big bad wolf standing in the shadows between two trees. "Hello," said Little Red Riding Hood. She did not know the wolf was bad, and she had already forgotten her mother's words about talking to strangers. Now, I stopped the video right here because we need to talk about what the mother said. The only directions that her mom said were don't talk to strangers. And here we can see that Little Red Riding Hood is talking to this stranger, this wolf. So, a problem is going to happen because she's breaking the rules. This is also something that we should be thinking about because maybe it's part of the lesson that we should learn. "Where are you going on this fine day?" asked the big bad wolf. "I'm going to my grandma's cottage on the other side of the forest," said Little Red Riding Hood. "She isn't feeling very well, and I'm bringing her this basket of food. And these flowers." "What a sweet girl you are," said the big bad wolf. He smiled and showed off his mouthful of sharp teeth. The big bad wolf was quite hungry, but he was not interested in the basket of food. "I had better be going," said Little Red Riding Hood. "Goodbye, Mr. Wolf," and she skipped off down the path. The big bad wolf's stomach grumbled and growled with hunger, and suddenly he had an idea. As quick as he could, he ran through the forest all the way to Grandma's cottage. The sneaky wolf opened the door very quietly and found Grandma asleep in her bed. He picked up the old woman, opened his mouth, and he swallowed poor Grandma in one gulp. Then the big bad wolf climbed into the bed and he pulled the blanket up to his chin. He put on Grandma's glasses and her nightcap, and he waited for the little girl with her flowers and basket of food. When Little Red Riding Hood arrived at the cottage, she opened the door quietly and found. Take a guess at who she's going to find. Grandma lying in bed. "Hello, Grandma," she said. "Mother told me you weren't feeling well, so I brought you some food and some flowers." "What a sweet girl," said the wolf in his fake grandma voice. You can see that this is the wolf in disguise as the grandma. Uh-oh. "Come over here. Come closer, my dear." Little Red Riding Hood took a step closer, and she noticed that something looked a little different about Grandma. "My," she said, "what big eyes you have, Grandma." "All the better to see you with," said the big bad wolf. "Come closer, my dear." Little Red Riding Hood took another step closer to the bed. "My," she said, "what big ears you have, Grandma." "All the better to hear you with," replied the wolf. "Come closer, my dear." Little Red Riding Hood took one more step closer. "My," she said in surprise. "What big teeth you have, Grandma." "All the better to eat you with," growled the big bad wolf. He jumped out of the bed. And he opened his great big mouth. Little Red Riding Hood shrieked and tried to run, but the hungry wolf grabbed her up and swallowed Little Red Riding Hood in just one gulp. Now, I'm going to stop this here because this is a fairy tale. It's not a fable. Perhaps if it was a fable, the story would end here, and the moral of the story would be, don't talk to strangers. But we know that this is a fairy tale, and fairy tales have happy endings. So something must be coming up in the story that will make the bad character die or disappear, and the good characters live happily ever after, while still teaching us that same lesson to not talk to strangers. Outside the cottage, a woodsman happened to be walking through the forest when he heard Little Red Riding Hood's shriek of surprise. He hurried inside to see the wolf and his huge round belly. The woodsman grabbed up the big bad wolf, turned him upside down, and shook him by the feet. Little Red Riding Hood came tumbling out of the wolf's mouth, and Grandma followed. The three of them chased the big bad wolf out of the cottage, out of the forest, and over a hill. The big bad wolf ran for his life and was never seen again. Little Red Riding Hood learned her lesson, and she never, ever talked to strangers after that. And that is the end of the story. So, as you can see, there are all the fairy tale features in this story. There were good characters versus evil characters. The bad character disappeared. They lived happily ever after. And we even learned a very important lesson about not talking to strangers. Even though this is a fiction story and we don't actually talk to wolves, you can apply this lesson by not talking to anybody that you do not know. If you do not know them, you should not talk to them. You should be with your parents and your friends, your teachers. But if anybody who tries to talk to you, who you do not know them, then you should ignore them and go find an adult. Thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something from Little Red Riding Hood.